This is a Dynamite Network podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the Dynamic Duel podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Johnny DC.
And I'm his twin brother, Marvelous Joe.
And in this episode, we are doing a duel between the two landmass characters, Danny the Street from the Doom Patrol comics, and Krakoa, a mutant from Marvel's X-Men comics. This matchup has been an idea that our executive producers came up with a while back. I never actually thought you would ever do it because the speculation is going to be weird for this one. Like, I still have no idea how it's going to go down.
We're going into uncharted territory here, folks. Somebody give us a Guinness World Record because I think we're going to be the first people ever to speculate on how a fight would go between two locations. Not people or things, two locations. No idea how that's going to work out.
Right, yeah. Wish us luck. Before the matchup, we're going to break down the comic book movie news from the past week, of which there was still not really any news, thanks to the ongoing writers and actors strikes. We are going to talk about Ed Boon, the creator of Mortal Kombat, talking about a potential Marvel vs. DC fighting game, and that's about it. As always, we list our segment times in our episode description, so feel free to check out the show notes if you want to skip ahead to a particular topic.
As our listeners already know, our duel simulator has become so advanced it's gained sentience and has named itself the artificial life form for running extensive duels, just a rather very intelligent Simulator 9000 or Alfred Jarvis 9000. Here's a quick message for our listeners, so listen up.
Why, hello there. Do you love listening and chatting about Marvel and DC? Then become a part of the Dynamic Duel community on Patreon, where you can choose from 3 tiers. The Dynamic 2.0 tier lets you listen to this podcast without ads and gives you access to its Discord chat group where you can chat with Johnny DC and Marvelous Joe. The Fantastic 4 tier gives you that and more with 2 bonus episodes each month, including bloopers and top 10 shows where Johnny and Joe count down your favourite Marvel and DC subjects. The X-Force tier makes you an executive producer of Dynamic Duel, where every month you help the host choose what to review and who to fight against each other. And finally, the Dynamite Podcast Network tier allows aspiring podcasters to create their own battle-focused show using this Monte Carlo simulator. Johnny and Joe will help you develop your show, provide graphic support and consultation, and get you simulation results to announce on your show. Pitch the twins your show via email at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com or by reaching out to them on social media. Check it out at patreon.com/dynamicduel. Pip pip cheerio.
Thanks, AJ9K, and thanks to everyone who supports the podcast.
Be sure to tune into the Max Destruction podcast this week, guys. On Wednesday, August 30th, they're going to do an episode where they find out who would win in a fight between Sarah Connor from Terminator versus Ellen Ripley from Alien. That's going to be a big episode. Definitely check it out. The speculation between Dustyn and Ken should be awesome.
Yeah, this is an episode that I've been waiting for since the start of Max Destruction, so I'm super excited. But also be sure to tune into Senjo World, a new battle podcast featuring your favorite anime characters that drops every Thursday. Tune in this week to find out who would win in a fight between Hayato Furinji from Kenichi, the Mightiest Disciple, and Yujiro Hanma from Baki.
Visit dynamicpodcast.com or click the link in our show notes to listen to all the shows in our network. But with that out of the way,
quick to the No Prize.
A No Prize is an award Marvel used to give out to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award that we post on Instagram and in our email newsletter for the person that we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week. Last week's question was, who's your favorite robot character from Marvel and DC and why? And that was coming off of the announcement of my and Jonathan's card game that we invented called Chronicle AI, which is about artificial intelligence robots. We got 3 answers total, so let's run down our 2 honorable mentions and the No Prize winner. Our first honorable mention goes to Christopher Minotti, who said,
Hi guys, Christopher Minotti. My favorite Marvel DC robot character is Red Tornado. Red Tornado is a great character that is not used enough. I think his powers are very unique for a robot. Robots tend to have a lot of the same powers. Plus, it's a lot of fun watching his character grow, especially in Young Justice when he creates an alternate body to experience humanity. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, Red Tornado is very unique when it comes to other robots. Not many of them are elemental forces of nature like the Red Tornado, right? And the character was very well done in Young Justice, which was a callback to his mentorship role in the comic of the same title.
Yeah, Red Tornado has always been this interesting mix of like technology and nature, so there's always been that dichotomy within the character that I thought has been pretty interesting. If you want to learn more about Red Tornado, check out his duel episode against Sandman. It was basically wind versus earth powers. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Our next honorable mention goes to Mitchell Smoothie, who said,
Hello, Mitchell Smoothie here, and I would say my favorite robot is probably from Marvel, and it's the Sinister Adaptoid. Due to his abilities to copy all the Sinister Six, he's just the best robot, taking the best parts of Super Adaptoid and putting them into his own spin. That's why he's just the best robot, and he is a robot. I checked it out. Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, the Sinister Adaptoid is an Adaptoid with the powers of the Sinister Six. I would argue that Super Adaptoid is actually better. The Super Adaptoid gave birth to the Adaptoids after acquiring the power of the Cosmic Cube, and the Super Adaptoid itself was created from AIM, Advanced Idea Mechanics, using a portion of their Cosmic Cube. Basically, the robot can adopt any sort of power that it wants to. We're hoping to get a duel episode with Super Adaptoid against Amazo at some point, because Amazo is a robot with pretty much the same power too. That'll be a good one.
Yeah, I remember Super Adaptoid from the MODOK show, and he was hilarious. That's my only experience with him. But yeah, I think he's a fantastic robot. Thanks, Christopher and Mitchell, for taking the time to visit our website and record an answer. But the winner of this week's No Prize is Travis Herndon, who said,
Hey guys, Travis here. So my pick would have to be Baymax. I know he's not comic book accurate, but he's still an iconic robot character after just one movie. From his design, from his voice, you can't hate Baymax. And if you do, well, you deserve to get throat chopped. Not punched, but chopped for that comment.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like Baymax, who the hell do you think you are, right? Baymax is one of the most original, unique robot character designs in the history of robots, honestly. The way Pixar adapted him from the comic books, where he was more of a techno shapeshifter, to the film Big Hero 6, where he is like a cuddly balloon healthcare robot, I thought was pretty ingenious.
I mean, I don't like Baymax.
Well, you're a piece of shit then. Guess what? Prepare to get throat chopped.
I'm just kidding. I like Baymax. I love the design, like you mentioned, of the character from the movie. Have they incorporated that version into the comics?
No, they haven't. He's still like a metallic robot. Although, they don't appear too much.
Well, apparently Marvel Comics doesn't care for Baymax either.
They've kind of like relinquished the characters to Disney Publishing, because Disney kind of took the characters in a direction that seems a little bit more iconic and lasting.
Interesting.
So congrats to Travis for winning this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want a shot at winning your own No Prize, stay tuned to later on this episode when we'll be asking another question of the week. And now that that's done,
on to the news.
All right, this past week, comicbook.com did an interview with Ed Boon, who is the creative director behind NetherRealm Studios, which is a video game production company behind the Mortal Kombat franchise. And they've also done video games like Mortal Kombat vs. DC and the Injustice fighting video games. Ed has been talking for a while about how one of his dream projects would be a Marvel vs. DC fighting video game. And that's pretty cool, because it is also a dream project for us Marvel vs. DC fans. That's the end all be all, I think, is a fighting video game between these comic book characters. And when Ed Boon talks about it, it feels more and more like it's within the realm of reality. Hopefully we see this before we get too old, you and I, Jonathan. But it was interesting because like a while back, he posted a poll on Twitter asking fans what they hoped his next project would be. And one of the options on that poll was a Marvel vs. DC game, and it overwhelmingly won his Twitter poll. and nothing has been heard since, other than Ed Boon basically stating that it would be difficult to bring this into fruition.
I mean, I kind of feel like if DC and Marvel don't agree to do this, they're just leaving money on the table, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think with both film franchises struggling as well, this would be a great way to test the waters to see how eager audiences are for a Marvel and DC crossover.
Yeah, it might be a good transition from like a cinematic universe to a video game universe in which they release a bunch of, different spin-offs and stuff like that. I think that would be a hell of a good time. I'm going to go ahead and read a quote from comicbook.com's interview with Ed Boon regarding this project, in which he said, "I mean, we did a number of games with DC characters. When you're kids and you're like, who would win in a fight, Mighty Mouse or Superman? Just these dumb different universe things. There's part of us that still has those immature conversations. To me, Spider-Man and Batman would be the coolest thing in the world. So of course we'd love to do that, but it's probably very difficult to jump that hurdle." To which I say, Jonathan and I have made it a weekly thing to have those immature conversations. It's so much fun to speculate on how battles between these characters will go. And even more exciting, I think, would be to actually play it out using a controller.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've mentioned this before, maybe once or twice on this podcast, that the whole reason we even have this podcast is because we've been dreaming about a Marvel versus DC video game since we were teenagers.
Legit, no lie, sometimes I go to bed at night just dreaming up different ways that a Marvel versus DC video game could go. Usually in my dreams, it ends up something like Super Smash Brothers or the recent DC Multiverses game. But I would settle for literally any version of this game.
For real, I would take anything, even a Tetris version of it. I would take a Pokemon, back and forth, choose your move, kind of RPG style. Anything Marvel versus DC.
Yeah, of course, DC characters are in a fighting game called Injustice, which uses the same combat engine as Mortal Kombat. And the Marvel characters are commonly featured in the Marvel vs. Capcom video games, which uses a Street Fighter type fighting engine. So there's a lot of different ways that this game could go, but that brings us to our question of the week.
Pitch us your perfect Marvel vs. DC video game. What would it be like?
Yeah, record your answer at dynamicduel.com by clicking on the red microphone button in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, which will prompt you to leave us a voicemail. Your message could be up to 30 seconds long, and don't forget to leave your name in case we include you on the podcast. We'll pick our favorite answer and award that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to Instagram and our email newsletter. Be sure to answer before September 2nd.
But that does it for all of the news for this episode. Now let's move on to the main event, where we find out who would win in a fight between the Doom Patrol member, Danny the Street, and the X-Men member, Krakoa. Okay, Danny the Street versus Krakoa. As we mentioned, this is in lead up to episode 350 in a few weeks. That's going to pit the teams of the Doom Patrol against the Guardians of the Galaxy. When we and the executive producers were trying to think of the rosters for that team matchup, we figured that Mento was a good member to put on the Doom Patrol team. Although I don't think any of us loved that. Mento's not a really well-known member, and he's kind of an asshole douchebag. He's just not a very good character. But everyone loves Danny the Street. He's very popular on the Doom Patrol television series. And so when we were thinking of the idea of maybe we replace Mento with Danny the Street, I have to admit I got a little frightened because I knew that more people were going to like Danny the Street than Mento. And sure enough, we voted to include him on the roster, which brings us to this episode.
Yeah, of course, there's not a whole lot of people that Danny of the Street can go up against on Marvel. The most prominent, physical location other than Ego the Living Planet, which we've already done a dual episode with him. But the other best example, I think, is Krakoa, the sentient mutant island that is the current home of the X-Men and all mutants on Marvel's Earth.
Yeah, the closest thing we've done to two locations fighting each other is Ego the Living Planet against Mogo the Green Lantern, which was a month ago.
Yeah, but that was relatively easy because the two planets are still, separate entities. They exist within their own space and everything. But two like locations, like a street and an island, how do you get them to fight against each other?
We're going to figure it out. But to explain the methodology behind our duels, let's go to our sentient duel simulator, Alfred Jarvis 9000. AJ9K, tell our listeners how you go about determining a winner in our duel matchups.
Yes, of course, sir. The way I determine a winner between the contestants is by running 1,000 Monte Carlo simulations using the character's statistics. A Monte Carlo simulation is a probabilistic model used to determine outcomes through random sampling. In this case, I randomize the statistics along a normal distribution as a way to simulate the many variables that can occur during battle. The stat parameters are based on the official Marvel power grid from which the DC character's statistics are extrapolated. Additional stat categories are included such as range, damage potential, versatility and perception in order to create a more detailed and accurate simulation. The results of the 1,000 simulations provide a percentage of wins for each character. The contestant with the higher percentage is declared the victor, as they have a higher probability to win any given battle. In an equitable pairing, neither character should win 100% of the matches. The comic book stories have shown that there's even a way for Batman to defeat Superman, so the confidence rate of my method falls in line with the precedents that have been established in the source material. My mathematical simulations are without subjectivity or bias. Feats are not the sole consideration, nor are fan votes tabulated for determination of the winner.
Thanks, AJ9K. Before we run the simulations, though, we like to break down each character's histories and abilities before improvising a scenario on how we imagine one of the 1,000 simulations would play out beat for beat.
Yeah, and I believe it's my turn to go first, this time with the Marvel character. So let me go ahead and tell you all about Krakoa. 2 billion years ago, the very first mutants outside of the normal cycle of evolution thrived on Earth. One of these mutants was named Grove, a being who, along with their fellow mutants, formed a group called the Threshold. The Threshold was attacked by a group of undersea mutants called the Unbreathing, and Grove sustained heavy injuries in battle. Grove's mutation, which allowed them to heal through vegetative growth, transformed them from a wood elf-looking being into a bark-covered creature much like the species Flora colossi, of which the hero Groot is a member. No longer resembling themselves, Grove changed their name to Okara. And though both the Threshold and Unbreathing mutants would eventually perish, Grove, now Okara, lived on, changing and growing through the millennia until they reached the size of an island, free-floating in the South Pacific. Several thousand years ago, Okara became an island home to a new generation of mutants led by Apocalypse, whom you can learn more about in our Black Adam vs. Apocalypse duel. These mutants were attacked by an other-dimensional demon horde that used its mythical sword to cleave Okara in half. Grove, which had become Okara, now became two separate beings, Arakko and Krakoa. Apocalypse sealed the dimensional breach, trapping the demon horde in their native realm, but sacrificing his fellow mutants alongside Arakko, half their home. This left Krakoa alone, once again existing as a free-floating island, now just a part of its former whole and without much of its former sentience. Years later, during World War II, Krakoa played a small role in the Pacific Theater when Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos stumbled upon the island and discovered it was sentient. Fury and Krakoa reached an agreement that allowed the Commandos to leave the island as long as they kept its existence a secret. You can learn more about Nick Fury in his duel episode against Rick Flag. Eventually, Professor X telepathically discovered Krakoa via his power-amplifying device called Cerebro. He sent his X-Men to investigate, but the island captured them. Professor X then sent additional mutant recruits to rescue the X-Men. Krakoa formed itself into a giant humanoid shape and attacked the mutants, but Polaris, a mutant with powers of magnetism like her father Magneto, used her abilities that were supercharged by Storm's lightning to interact with the Earth's magnetic field, and she launched Krakoa's landmass into space. While in orbit, Krakoa was captured by the enigmatic cosmic entity known as the Stranger. The Stranger took the island to its lab for study, however some spores of Krakoa had broken off prior and landed on Earth. One spore became a danger room-like training ground called the Danger Grotto, which was used by the Generation X mutant team. Another spore swallowed up 56 construction workers before it was stopped by the New Mutants. And another spore landed in the British Isles, where the mutant team Excalibur defeated it. Eventually, a member of the Eternals race managed to free Krakoa from the Stranger's lab in space, and it returned to Earth. Professor X began working to reawaken the island's consciousness and reshape Krakoa into a paradise for mutants as it had once been thousands of years prior. He bioengineered new flowers on the island that produced chemicals that solved many of mankind's issues regarding antibiotics, longevity, and mental illnesses. Professor X offered these drugs to any country that recognized Krakoa as a sovereign mutant nation, transforming the island into a pharmaceutical titan and world power overnight. He also created flowers that could bloom into self-sustaining biomes anywhere in the universe, which also served as gateways to and from the main island. After a period of prosperity on Krakoa, where Professor X and Magneto seemingly achieved a compromise regarding human and mutant relations, Krakoa's other half, Arakko, returned from the other dimension where it and its mutant residents had been trapped. Angry at Apocalypse for his actions several millennia ago, both islands chose a series of champions to represent them in a fighting tournament instead of an all-out war. Ultimately, Krakoa's champions won the contest, and Apocalypse was sent to live in the other dimension while Arakko was brought to Earth. Though the two island halves had finally gotten their chance to reunite, they had grown so different over the millennia that Krakoa and Arakko decided to remain separate and unique. However, a new island of warlike mutants didn't seem feasible on Earth when the mutants of Krakoa had just achieved a semblance of peace with humans. Therefore, Magneto developed a plan to relocate Arakko to Mars, where he would terraform the planet with Storm's help to accommodate that island and its mutants. Mars was then claimed as the first mutant world, with Arakko serving as the new capital of the solar system. Back on Krakoa, which achieved a total population of approximately 250,000, mutant kind celebrated their new achievements with an annual celebration event called the Hellfire Gala. And that's as far as I'll get with Krakoa's backstory. Powers-wise, Krakoa is a sentient hive mind landmass incorporating all vegetable and animal life forms that reside on it outside of its mutant inhabitants. It has full control of its mass and can terraform in any manner it chooses, including creating natural formations such as forests, volcanoes, and lakes, and unnatural formations such as massive tentacles, or a giant humanoid rock plant monster, or even small life forms that serve as an extension of itself. Krakoa can drain the life force out of any being that steps foot on its surface, and its biome can also survive in any environment, even the cold oxygen-less void of space, and it can create gateway portals allowing residents to travel between portions of itself. Krakoa has also demonstrated the ability to create a variety of chemicals via manipulation of its own natural chemistry. Though the island is conscious, it has limited intelligence and operates mostly out of instinct. That's Krakoa.
That was pretty convoluted. I'm not sure it needed to be that convoluted.
Well, that describes Hickman's run on X-Men to a T, right? I mean, Hickman threw in this entire mythology that he developed that stretches from ancient prehistory to outer space. And it's a lot, you know? It's one of the most unique things about his run on X-Men, and also one of the worst. It's almost like he brought in all these different elements and ideas that don't necessarily fit the mold of the X-Men, but I still admire Hickman as a writer nonetheless.
Just the whole thing of like Krakoa being like initially a like wood elf that became a plant island that was split in two. Just make it a fucking mutant that was an island. Period. That's all you need to say.
Right. I think the biggest bullshit thing is that he decided to name the original landmass as an anagram for Krakoa called Okara, and then it split into Arakko and Krakoa. It's just, he didn't need to do that, you know? They didn't need to be rearrangements of the same 6 letters, you know?
Right. How old is Krakoa? Is like Krakoa like one of Stan Lee's old like monsters, like Fin Fang Foom or something like that?
Krakoa made its first appearance, to my recollection, in Giant Size X-Men, where we were introduced to characters like Storm, Nightcrawler, and Colossus.
Oh, really? That's cool. And you know what else is cool? Danny the Street. Let me get to his backstory. Danny the Street is a sentient, male, genderqueer pocket dimension that most often presents himself by appearing as a street full of macho military surplus stores and sports shops, but decorated with feminine flourishes such as frilly pink curtains and awnings. Danny is the last survivor of a dream dimension of pure imagination known sometimes as Wonderland, Neverland, or Oz that caught the sickness of the real world and fell apart. Since then, for decades and perhaps longer, Danny has traveled the world, warping space-time to integrate himself seamlessly into any location in search of the lonely outcasts of the world. Whether it's an alley in Hong Kong or a street in Toronto, Danny attracts those who feel unaccepted and gives them a place to live and feel welcome, often entertaining them with drag shows performed by the Perpetual Cabaret, a drag troupe who also lives on Danny. Danny's existence was eventually discovered by the Men from Nowhere, a group founded by Darren Jones who was obsessed with eliminating from the world any and all strangeness, peculiarity, or anything that's not essentially a white picket fence 1950s sitcom, which is how he lived his life, going so far as to have his wife hit a laugh track button whenever he made a joke in his home. When the Men from Nowhere arrived on Danny, they began killing its citizens and breaking Danny's property. The Doom Patrol arrived and began being attacked by the Men from Nowhere as well. After bringing them down, Danny teleported next to Darren Jones's home and had the Perpetual Cabaret dress him up in drag just before his boss visited for dinner, which resulted in Darren being fired and his reputation tarnished after Danny teleported away.
Sounds like the laugh track would be used a lot in that situation, though.
It was used in that situation, exactly. It was revealed one of Danny's residents was an amnesiac hero named Flex Mentallo, who had regained his memory after seeing the Doom Patrol come to the rescue of the citizens. Flex, attempting to rebuild his life, was captured by the Men from Nowhere along with the Doom Patrol member Dorothy Spinner and imprisoned in the sub-basement of the Pentagon. Danny helped the Doom Patrol rescue Flex and Dorothy by teleporting himself into the Pentagon basement, after which Danny became the Doom Patrol's headquarters. Not long after, however, Danny was seemingly abducted by Mr. Nobody and the Brotherhood of Dada, villains of the Doom Patrol and outcasts in their own right, though it was revealed that the Brotherhood merely wanted Danny to take them away, which he was happy to oblige. When an evil entity known as the Candlemaker emerged from the mind of Dorothy Spinner, Danny was nearly destroyed. After healing from the ordeal, Danny eventually grew to form Danny the World, an interdimensional planet, and became the home of several Doom Patrol members such as Crazy Jane and Negative Man for a time when they left the team. Danny the World was annihilated by the Gentrifiers, however, who had attempted to take him over. Leaving Danny as only a brick, Crazy Jane fled with him back to the Doom Patrol, which was based on Oolong Island at the time. After taking some time to heal, Danny eventually became Danny the Bungalow. He and Crazy Jane rejoined the Doom Patrol, during which time he returned to being a street. In post-Flashpoint continuity, Danny the Street was revealed to be a teenager who was discovered by Red Robin of the Teen Titans and recruited to infiltrate an organization known as Nowhere, which captured and experimented on young metahumans. After helping rescue Superboy and Kid Flash from Nowhere, Danny became a member of the Teen Titans, acting as the team's spy. Danny was later nearly destroyed by Nowhere and used the last of his strength to teleport the Teen Titans from Mystery Island to New York, seemingly sacrificing himself in the process and ending up as a mundane alley in the city. It was revealed later, however, that Danny had actually reverted to the form of a brick, which was found by Crazy Jane, and the two traveled to the cosmos together. After being used as a weapon by an entity known as D to kill a god, Danny retreated to Earth and grew to become Dannyland, an amusement park. With the happiness he was able to bring the masses, Danny gained enough strength to create his own sentient life, bringing to life a comic character from the Danny-published Danny Comics named Casey, Space Case Brink, to see what she would be like in the real world. Unaware of her true nature, Casey was contacted by Danny and urged to reform the Doom Patrol when Dannyland became threatened by an alien organization known as Vectra, who wanted to use Danny's new ability to create life in order to create cheap meat for their chain of intergalactic fast food restaurants. Taking on an additional form as Danny the Ambulance, Danny helped Casey find the Doom Patrol members to reform the team, and together they defeated Vectra. When the Doom Patrol member Robot Man received an upgrade that caused him to become his own planet, Casey sacrificed herself to stop him, and she returned to being a comic character in Danny Comics. And that's Danny's history so far. Powers-wise, Danny is a sentient pocket dimension capable of warping space-time to teleport to any location and integrate his space seamlessly into it. Danny has a spatial sense that allows him to move to any location in any universe, even some hidden or unknown areas. He's able to generate buildings, structures, and objects to fill his space, and the more inhabitants that exist within him, the stronger he becomes and the larger he's able to grow, potentially even to planet size. When these structures and objects are damaged, however, Danny is weakened and is unable to maintain his size. Recently, Danny has shown to be able to generate sentient life, though this requires a deal of strength. He's able to communicate with his inhabitants by telekinetically transforming the environment to form words, whether on a window display or even a puddle on the ground. That's Danny the Street.
I gotta say, that's every bit as whimsical and fantastical as I hoped it would be, being familiar with the character on the Doom Patrol television series. Anytime Danny the Street shows up on that show, I'm always thrilled because it's just such a unique concept, especially his method of communication. Just the way he expresses himself is quite brilliant, actually. I think it's a truly unique concept.
Yeah, he's really cool.
I'm glad we're going to include him on the Team Duel match that's coming up against the Guardians of the Galaxy. I feel like I have a better idea of how that will play out, where it's an environment versus a group of superheroes, as opposed to how this will play out, where it's an environment versus another environment. But let's go ahead and give it a shot. Because now that we got their histories and abilities out of the way, we're going to speculate on how one of the 1,000 simulated matches will go. The winner is determined by simulations, not the speculation, but it's fun to imagine how the fight could play out. Alfred Jarvis 9000, what are the rules of our speculation?
Well, I should say there are no rules, other than the characters have no prior knowledge of the other going into the fight. All they are aware of starting out is that the other character is a threat that needs to be eliminated. For the speculation, the contestants will begin approximately 50 meters apart in a nondescript environment that will have no bearing on the match itself, as no environmental statistics are considered in my simulations. The contestants must earn victory on their own merit.
And since both characters are environments, we could go ahead and disregard what AJ9K said about environments not being a factor.
But let's go ahead and get into it. Danny the Street and Krakoa meet on the battlefield, and they are the battlefield as well. But who goes first?
Okay, so I'm assuming this match starts off with the environments, like the street and the island, about 50 meters apart from each other, while the space around them is otherwise void and empty.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Danny is going to start by teleporting himself onto Krakoa. So now this island has a bustling street in the middle of it. And am I allowed to have people on Danny the Street, would you say? Like the perpetual cabaret, maybe?
I think like how usually in our duels the environment has no bearing on the characters. Here, the characters are going to have no bearing on the environments. So the locations have to win on their own merits, basically.
Okay.
So no people.
Okay, let's say Danny teleports onto Krakoa, and he's just going to cause like one of the shelves in his army surplus store to break. So these boxes of kerosene fuel tanks are just going to roll out of the store into Krakoa, which is going to cause this huge fire to break out on the island, and Danny's going to teleport away from that to prevent any damage to himself.
Okay, so Krakoa has this fire going on it, but it's going to terraform, and it's going to divert a river that's flowing through the island over to the fire to put it out. And then once it's out, Krakoa is going to divert the river again to wherever Danny has teleported, and the river's going to flood Danny, the street. And the flash flood is basically going to tear everything apart, like knocking over signs and small buildings.
Except one of the signs is going to read F you.
It's going to be like, oh shit.
Okay, so Danny's definitely hurt by this, and he's going to become Danny the boat. No. Danny the pirate ship. And on this pirate ship are cannons, and that's going to allow Danny to begin firing cannonballs in all directions that are just going to tear through Krakoa as Danny sails down the river.
Okay, but Danny the pirate ship now has to navigate through this series of large, jagged rocks that Krakoa puts in the river's path. So the pirate ship is going to be crashing and breaking apart all over these rocks. And then, oh no, it goes over a waterfall.
Okay. Danny's sustained more damage, so he's going to shrink again and transform as he falls into Danny the fighter jet, because now he's pissed off.
Can he turn into a fighter jet?
Well, yeah, he could turn into a vehicle, like he was once Danny the ambulance, right? Though he probably can't pilot himself, but, that's what autopilot is for.
Okay.
So he's going to be just, tearing through the sky with Highway to the Danger Zone playing at full blast, and he's going to begin firing missiles at the Krakoa surface. I do have to say, this is very uncharacteristic for Danny. He's normally very peaceful. You just made him mad.
I mean, it's no holds barred action, so you got to do what you got to do.
Right.
So Danny's a fighter jet, but Krakoa is going to manifest this large volcano on its surface, which is going to erupt a massive lava and ash into the air, and that's going to blind Danny while he's flying and just burn him with the lava. And that's going to cause him to crash into the mountainside and die.
Well, actually, Krakoa is going to see the plane go into the smoke, but he doesn't see Danny emerge because Danny teleports away onto another part of the island, into a flower meadow, as Danny the flower meadow. And from here, while he's camouflaged, he's going to gather strength from the life force of Krakoa itself to become Danny the superhighway. And this thing is going to stretch across the entirety of Krakoa. And it's going to be full of massive diesel trucks that are all running, and they're just polluting Krakoa's environment.
Oh no, pollution. So, earthquake. Basically, all those streets and vehicles are going to come crashing down because Krakoa is going to generate an earthquake that just swallows everything up in this massive tremor.
Okay, so Danny's underground. Let's say now he becomes Danny the Mine, okay? And mines are full of explosives. So let's say that happens. The explosives are going to detonate, just blowing up a huge chunk of the island. And now Danny's going to teleport across the island as Danny the Pit Mine, just causing explosions all over the island and causing it to cave in on itself.
That's pretty good. Shit. Okay. All right. In order to stop the explosions from happening, Krakoa is going to have to catch Danny, as it were, right? So when Danny the Mine teleports to a new underground location on Krakoa, before he sets off the explosives, Krakoa is immediately going to send him up to the island's surface. And waiting for Danny there are a group of large stone golems with giant stone clubs that just proceed to beat the ever-loving shit out of this pit mine, rendering everything to dust.
I don't even know what that looks like. Okay, if Danny gets hit by a bunch of stone clubs, he's hurt for sure. So I'm going to say he just teleports away, which is going to cause the space-time that he occupied to fold back in on itself. And that circle of golems that were surrounding him hit and destroyed themselves, all right? Oh, and also, I didn't mention this, but those mines were uranium mines. So chunks of uranium are all over the island, just poisoning the shit out of it and just making everything die, essentially.
Okay. Well, in the comics, the U.S. did atomic bomb testing in the South Pacific Ocean near where Krakoa lived. And actually, that was what Professor X theorized turned Krakoa into a sentient mutant, was that radiation.
Dude, that's so much better than what Hickman came up with.
Yeah, that was actually Krakoa's origin story before Hickman wrote the new backstory.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure Krakoa has been around radioactivity before and survived just fine. So I don't think Danny's attempt to poison Krakoa with uranium will do anything. And if Danny's now a bunker, Krakoa is just going to drain the life force out of Danny the bunker and reduce him to, Danny the rivet. And then Danny the nothing, because he's dead.
But, If Krakoa wasn't actually mutated via radiation, then we don't know actually if it was exposed to it, right? Like, that was just a theory.
True.
I say Professor X's theory was wrong, and that Krakoa was never exposed, and that Krakoa withers and dies, while Danny survives, off of spam and tang.
Well, let's go ahead and leave the match there. Either Danny poisons Krakoa with uranium by becoming uranium mines teleporting all over the island, or Krakoa drains the life force from Danny, as the island can do with any life form that exists on its surface. Let's go ahead and find out which of these scenarios happens by inputting the character stats, running the simulations, and coming back with a winner.
AJ9K, hit it.
Inputting data, running calculations, processing results, simulations complete.
All right, I think actually that speculation went better than I thought it would, because with Krakoa, I just had to come up with these natural disasters, essentially, considering Krakoa is a natural landmass. So it was easier than I thought it was going to be, honestly.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. The stats were not easy, I would say, and they're very different from any other characters that we've done before. Things like movement speed were interesting. We said that Danny, since he could teleport, was much faster than Krakoa, who's essentially stationary. Neither of these guys evade, and their fighting skill is basically non-existent.
Yeah, the stats that Krakoa really shined in, where Danny wasn't quite up to snuff, were durability and damage.
Yeah, Danny could get injured pretty easily, even just by breaking one of his glass panes. And he's not very offensive, so his damage stat category was much lower than Krakoa's.
However, in addition to speed, Danny also excelled in intelligence, because we said Danny's a little bit smarter than Krakoa, who largely operates off of instinct. But we said that Danny was also more perceptive.
Yeah, thanks to his spatial sense that allows him to teleport to locations and find people.
Danny definitely has this psychic readout thing going where he knows exactly what form to take wherever he's teleporting to. So we accounted for that in his perception. But both can perceive largely everything that occurs within them.
Right, exactly.
Both Krakoa and Danny are highly versatile, able to do essentially anything they want with their own existence, which makes them highly adaptable. With all these stats in mind and their disparities and similarities accounted for, Jonathan, who do you think's walking away with the win on this?
I personally think Danny the Street is going to win just because he's, faster and smarter. Instagram disagrees with me, apparently. 69% of them chose Krakoa as the winner in the poll that we did there.
Which is a lot. I was surprised, actually.
I was surprised just because, Krakoa has never been seen in live action before, whereas Danny the Street has.
So you think that Danny the Street is actually more popular than Krakoa?
I would have assumed so.
I think a lot of people are taking landmass into consideration because an island is a much bigger size than a street.
True, but Danny the Street can't accommodate for that. He could become the size of a planet if the circumstances are correct.
You're not wrong, but I have the results here.
Here you are, sir.
The winner between Danny the Street and Krakoa is Danny the Street.
Yes!
Which surprises me.
Really?
Honestly. Yeah. Danny the Street, out of 1,000 matches, won 573 of them, or 57.3% of the time, whereas Krakoa only won 427, or 42.7% of the time. The biggest disparity within their stats was speed, because apparently Danny the Street can just teleport all over the place wherever he wants. That speed advantage of Danny's cannot be overcome by Krakoa's durability and damage. And then you have the intelligence thing kind of putting Danny a little over the edge.
I called it. Honestly, I think another way this fight would really play out is that Danny would sense how lonely Krakoa is just as this solitary island and it become a planet for him to occupy itself on. And then he would just drown the island.
It is pretty interesting the way it played out. I just think about how much damage these creatures that Krakoa manifests could do to a street.
But in the end, that wasn't able to help Krakoa get the win, especially when you consider that Danny could have created his own life to combat those monsters as well if he chose to.
I don't know. These stats are largely theoretical, and I guess there's 1,000 different ways the match could have gone. It's just that Danny wins slightly more of them.
Boom, that's right. But that does it for this duel. Let us know what you thought about the results by writing to us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com or by visiting us on Instagram or X. You can find links to all of our accounts by checking out our show notes or visiting our website at dynamicduel.com.
And on our site, you could also find a link to our Patreon page where you could join our Dynamic 2.0 tier and chat with us and fellow listeners, our Fantastic 4 tier, which gets you bonus content each month, our X-Force tier that makes you an executive producer of this podcast, or our newest tier that lets you join our Dynamite Podcast Network. If you can't join Patreon, you can still support the show by signing up for our e-newsletter, also at dynamicduel.com.
Or you can also rate the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or on our website. In our next episode, we will be reviewing the DC animated series My Adventures with Superman. It's available on HBO Max and I think Cartoon Network as well. It was only 9 episodes. It's not a long watch. I definitely encourage you guys to watch it because it's pretty dang good.
Yeah, I haven't started watching it yet, so I have some catching up to do. But looking forward to see how it is.
Well, that does it for this episode. We want to give a big thanks to our executive producers, Ken Johnson,
John Starosky,
Zachary Hepburn,
Dustyn Balcom,
Miggy Matanguihan,
Brendan Estergard,
Nathaniel Wagner,
Levi Yeaton,
Nick Abanto,
Austin Wesolowski,
AJ Dunkerley,
Scott Camacho,
and Adam Speas for helping make this podcast possible. And we'll talk to you guys next week. Up, and away!
True believers.
Flawless victory.